Library, and I'm here to introduce Dr. Eric Jackson. Dr. Jackson is an associate professor of history in the Department of History and Geography at Northern Kentucky University and the director of the Black Studies program. Professor Jackson has also published several books that include, but are not limited to, a co-author volume titled Reflections of African American Leaders in the Peace Movement, Northern Kentucky, and Cincinnati's Underground Railroad. Currently, he's working on an introductory Black Studies textbook and an accompanying reader. In his spare time, he enjoys listening to smooth jazz and is an avid baseball fan of the Cincinnati Reds and the Chicago White Sox. Not advent.
I know what they mean. I sent the wrong copy.
I present to you Dr. Jackson.
So today we're supposed to be talking about researching African American history locally. So what I try to do when I talk about history research is to have folks look at it as a puzzle or a story or some sort of, you're a detective. You have all these pieces that you're trying to put together to make the bigger whole. But for African American history, you have to ask different questions because African Americans have a different history, although it's not better or worse, it's just a different history, so you have to ask different questions. So I usually start off research classes with a couple of video clips, so I'm going to just show one here.
Tonight on History Detectives.
These guns mean a lot to me. Who is John P. Thompson?
Were these people members of the Klan?
I hope that's not what I'm getting ready to run into.
I have an amplifier that I believe belonged to the great James Jamerson, that Motown guy. Who is that guy?
In the late 70s, my dad purchased these guns from an antique dealer. These guns mean a lot to me because Dad gave them to me the year my son was born. John P. Thompson, Owensboro, Kentucky. They were priced on the Antique Roadshow.
Really interested in this pair of pistols for retail. They would probably bring today around $30,000. And that's without knowing who Mr. Thompson is.
So I want to know who is John P. Thompson.
These ornate pistols would have been expensive when they were made. Whoever he was, John P. Thompson was no ordinary soldier. And there's something else. This investigation hits mighty close to home. This is an exciting story for me because I'm from Kentucky. I spent an awful lot of time, 40 or 50 miles from Owensboro, Kentucky. I grew up hearing about my great-great-grandpa Sam, who was a Confederate, and he was a member of the 10th Kentucky Cavalry. So to see these pistols with this guy, John P. Thompson, from Owensboro, Kentucky, man, the bells started ringing. Dulcie, I know what's in the box here, because you brought these to the Antiques Roadshow in Pittsburgh, right? Wow. So there's an escutcheon here that says John P. Thompson, Owensboro, Kentucky. They're absolutely beautiful. What did you think they were used for?
I thought that they had something to do with the Civil War
Okay.
because of the paperwork here.
Inside the pistol case, Dulcie found a prison parole document dated May 1865, just 1 month after the war's end. It gives Thompson's rank and his regiment. I understand prisoner of war, belonging 12th Battalion Kentucky Cavalry, Jack P. Thompson, Major 12th Kentucky Cavalry. Looks like he got this at the end of the war and he's being paroled after being a prisoner of war. Dulcie wants to know if the pistols saw action in the war and more about their owner. So I'm ready to get going.
Thank you.
The pistols are Derringers, made in Philadelphia, and their ornate design and likely price tag suggest that Major Thompson may have been someone prominent. He certainly took up arms in one of the most divided and dangerous areas of the country. Probably nowhere more in the United States did you see brother fighting against brother. It was a war that literally tore this state apart. Pressed between North and South, the Bluegrass State did eventually back the Union, but tens of thousands of Kentuckians were staunch Confederates. Both John P. Thompson and my relative were among them. My great-great-grandfather Sam fought in the 10th Kentucky Cavalry, commanded by John Hunt Morgan. His was a guerrilla force which raided deep behind Union lines. John P. Thompson was in the 12th Kentucky Cavalry, but, you know, during the war, the 10th and the 12th could certainly have been under the same command, and they might have known each other, who knows? From what I know about guns, Derringers were not your typical battlefield weapon. I reached out to my friend Chris Mitchell. He's a weapons specialist who first looked at Dulcie's pistols on the Antiques Roadshow. He wants to show me how the Derringer works, but doesn't want to risk firing Dulcie's. So he's brought his own.
I just happen to have it right here. You would never know it.
Take the powder, pour it down the muzzle. Then we're going to put the patch on top. We're going to take our rammer. All right, and now we have the gun loaded. We're going to take our percussion cap. We're going to keep the barrel pointed in a safe direction, and we'll head out to the range.
Let's go. We'll stand roughly 25 feet from the target.
All right, take your aim and let's see what we can do. You went over it. I went over it. I didn't hit the target. There you go.
It took me 3 tries to even hit the target. And that's the point Chris wanted to make. As we head inside, he explains that Derringer was not terribly useful at long distance on the field of battle, but it was popular because it could be hidden and packed a punch at short range.
These could be used for protection. You know, you could carry them in your coat pocket. If you're in a close fight or in a hand-to-hand situation, this is definitely usable.
Chris says that Derringer's short barrel and large caliber made it a favorite of gamblers, outlaws, and assassins.
Probably is the reason that most, even kids today, know that name. It's a Derringer pistol that John Wilkes Booth used to kill Abraham Lincoln.
He doesn't know who Thompson was, but his guns were lethal, stealthy, and...
So my point here is to show this clip for a number of reasons. Number one is a Kentucky topic. And number two is to understand that you're not going to be doing history, especially for African Americans, by yourself. So you have to have people helping you. And you have to reach out to other people as you're going down this journey, or as this detective story. So that film showed that he had the object, the historical object, which was the Derringer, but he had to have help to understand how to do the research. And then he was asking specific questions, and which is the same thing you do for African American research locally. There's questions that should go through your mind depending on the topic consistently. And so those questions generally drive you to a specific historical research center, a type of research document, a person, a location, a family, individuals, and so forth. But there's questions that should be going through your mind. That's the big picture. Also, there's a kind of a definitive, at least he would argue, Tony Burroughs wrote a book back in the, I think it's late 1900s, or 1990s, early 2000s, called Black Roots, A Beginner's Guide to Tracing African American Family Tree, which is a genealogical piece, which there's different questions you ask when you're doing African American genealogy. So I can pass this around if you want to flip through. They're not better questions. They're not worse questions if you're doing traditional American genealogy. They're just different questions you have to ask for obvious reasons. Meaning African Americans, you tend to hit a roadblock at certain periods when you try to trace African Americans' families. You have to ask different questions because obviously African Americans up until the 13th Amendment in 1865 were owned by other people. And so you have to go in a different direction and deal with things, tax records. You have to deal with the courthouse because African Americans, when they're enslaved persons of color, they have to be paid, taxes have to be paid on these folks because they're property. So you have to ask different questions to get to that family history. They may take on the owner's last name. So you have to ask a different question. Doesn't make it worse, doesn't make it better, it's just a different question. And so when we talk about local history, you have to define what it is. Local history is a study of counties, towns, neighborhoods, and local events. It's also a microcosm of American history. So some people try to separate out African American history from American history. I don't. It's the same because it's interlocked. So it's just a microcosm of understanding, like a lens you're understanding American history from a different perspective. So it's the same history, it's just a different lens. It's just like you would do research on a different ethnic group. Let's say you're talking about Native peoples or Germans or Italians. It's just a different lens that you're trying to understand American history, but you're doing it through the lens of African American lens. And so you're also studying small areas during a specific time when you're talking about local history. Small areas at a specific time. And you're trying to do it in great details. I would argue the smaller the area, the more details you can get because you can ask more detailed questions about what's going on. And lastly, local history helps to place an individual, groups of people, etc., within a specific geographical location. So that local history forces you to look at small chunks of history. But it's also reflective of the bigger picture. Meaning if you're doing history and try to find a history of African Americans in Covington or Newport or Boone County or Union or Burlington, what you want to do is to ask specific questions to see if it's paralleling bigger historical themes. And so what I've done here for my presentation is to take portions of books I've put together. Specifically, I put together a book back in 2005 on African Americans in Northern Kentucky, which is images of African Americans. And then I'm going to talk about the questions I asked myself to do that research. And specifically, it's just a chunk of that history. I mean, in 45 minutes, which is less than 45 minutes, I'm probably down to like 35 or 25. There's no way in the world I can talk about every aspect of trying to do research on African American history locally. There's no way. It would probably take me 2 semesters, if not 2 years. And so I'm just giving you one little snapshot. Snapshot meaning using my research that I've done and highlighting local research facilities in the area that I use to do my own history. Not to say it's the end all, it's just one way of doing local history on African Americans. So initially I have slides on local areas. For example, in 1788, Cincinnati is founded as a river town. Kentucky becomes a state in 1792. It's just a topographical map, because one of the things I try to do when I'm doing research locally is I have to see things. I'm a visual researcher. I need maps. I need to know the areas that I'm looking at. So maps for me are best. And so I kind of break them down in counties sometime. Then I'll get a county map and try to break it down even farther of communities I'm looking at, because then it helps me go through census records, running tracks. And so I start off with maps. But I'm not saying it will work for everybody. It just works for me. I love maps. And so the enslavement of people in northern Kentucky in particular was different than enslavement in central Kentucky or southern Kentucky. Because in this area, you didn't have huge plantation economies. And so there was no need to bring hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of enslaved African Americans to the region. So generally there are 1 or 2, 3 or 4, sometimes up towards 6 or 7. And they're more of a, and it's not to diminish the harshness of the institution of enslavement. There's no way you can diminish the harshness of the institution. If nothing else, people are not volunteering to be enslaved. All right? But at the same time, it is different compared to central Kentucky and southern Kentucky. It's just different. It's a different economy. it's a different mode of production, and it dictates the number of people who are in the area of African origins. So in northern Kentucky, they're generally smaller pockets of folks, one or two, and they're usually within the house areas. They may work little fields, but they're not huge numbers of them. And this is just one example. And so these are enslaved persons of color in Covington, all right? And so you would think that they're not enslaved people of color because the way they're dressed. Because she has a long dress that hits the floor. And he has a bow tie on. And he's got full clothing. And that's not usually the image you see of enslaved people. It's not a usual image. So on the surface level, it doesn't look too bad. It just doesn't. And so it doesn't reflect the harshness of the institution. Because again, they didn't volunteer to be enslaved. But they are enslaved based on one of the first, if not the first, Kentucky slave code. And this is what it literally says. It's adopted in 1798, and you can read it for yourself. But it's the first Kentucky enslavement code. They're trying to define this institution in the state of Kentucky. And so it reaches the entire state, obviously, but it manifests itself differently depending on if you're talking northern Kentucky, central Kentucky, or southern Kentucky. The entire state has an institution. But again, it manifests itself differently throughout the bluegrass state. And it's harsh. And this is what I'm talking about earlier. This is a tax bill, state of Kentucky. And you can see right here that they have to pay money.
What was slides? What was the word?
Use your imagination.
Really?
Use your imagination. This is 1857. What are you thinking?
Oh my gosh.
1857? I'm sorry. I just tell the story. I don't interpret people's moral fabric. I'm just telling the story. And then I'll get to where I got these documents after I show a couple.
Now, does this relate to that couple?
No.
This
It's
is
just a
just
document.
a document.
Yeah, it's just a document. And I kind of pick and choose different aspects of the book I wrote on African Americans in Northern Kentucky, and just to lay out the documents, and then I'll talk about where I got it from.
So that, does that say $12? I'm not making that out.
1,200.
1,200.
1,200.
So about how much per slave? I mean,
I think he had 7 to 10.
70 cents, so we're talking about.
We said 7
7
to 10.
to 10.
7 or 10.
7 to
I don't
10.
hear well either, but
7 to 10 enslaved persons.
so 10 would be $120.
Yeah. Which I don't know if that's average, it's just what he had to pay.
Yeah. More expensive than the jewelry
Yeah.
or the horses.
Exactly. And so everybody knows that, most people know the Margaret Garner story, so, and then this is one example of what enslaved persons of color, one of the extreme cases of a response to not letting one grow up under that institution, where she escapes from Boone County, ends up in downtown Cincinnati, is captured. She decides to make the ultimate decision about her kids. And she ends up slitting the throat of her 2-year-old daughter. And she's caught before she can do the same thing to her little children. The interesting thing, or one of the major interesting things about the case here, is that how she's tried. Because up until the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and even farther, enslaved African Americans were not citizens of the United States legally. They're property. And so if you try her for murder, you have to start thinking about the law. Because does that mean she's a person? Or does that mean that she's property? I mean, that's a major decision the United States have to make, not just Ohioans and Kentucky. The United States have to deal with, if you're going to try her for murder, she's going to have to be defined as a person. But this is not a discussion on Margaret Garner in particular. which is another whole talk. Yeah. And so, some of the documents that I just shown the previous slides can be obtained from places like the Boone County Public Library. A lot of this material is online, but some of them is there at the facility itself. And they come up with these particular subtitles of the chronicles. If you go on the Boone County Public Library site itself, go to local history, there's a section called Chronicles of Boone County. And then there's subsections that are called African Americans in Boone County, African American Family Files, African American Birth Records from 1852, and so forth. And so a lot of this stuff has been digitized or online. And you just have to kind of ask the right questions to get to this stuff. And so when I was putting together that book on Northern Kentucky, African Americans in Northern Kentucky, one of the first places I went is to the Boone County Public Library for obvious reasons. I live out there. So it's just a natural response. And so they have an African American genealogical group in Kentucky in general, and there's a link on their site that talks about specifically Northern Kentucky. Then you have the Kenton County Public Library. Did some research down there, the one in Covington, but you can go to the other facilities and have access to similar, if not the same material. You have Heritage Quest Online, Kentucky newspapers, Faces and Places in Northern Kentucky, Greater Cincinnati Memory Project, which are just images. Obviously American slave narratives, Cincinnati Enquirer from 1841 to 1922. And so again, there's a plethora of information in all those different subtitles. And most of that you can access fairly easily, either at the facility itself or go online and go to the different links and then pull up specific documents or at least citations to documents in our fabulous facility here. And they have fabulous records such as Linden Grove Cemetery records, Jim Reese research files, General James Taylor family papers. The Bruce family papers is intriguing because that tax record that I showed you came from the Bruce papers. And Bruce is an interesting family and has a different, interesting family history. You have the Theodore the Theodore H. Harris collection, and my colleagues here, the Hamilton's piece is there you go. Now you're a star. You can ask him questions. Campbell County Historical Society. Image of their facility. Have a representative of the society right there on the camera. They have their own. So these are just samples, folks. They have more. All of these facilities have so much more information that are in these slides. It's just ridiculous. So this just gives you a snapshot. And so when somebody says, well, I don't know where I can go to do history on African Americans in Northern Kentucky, I point them to all these different directions. Oh yeah, you can. Number one, you need to ask the right questions. And number two, when you ask the right questions, it'll lead you to a specific research facility. The information is there. It's just how hard do you want to get it? And how long do you want to take to get it? And even across the river. I was in grad school at the University of Cincinnati, one of the most detailed, in-depth public libraries that I've ever visited throughout the country is this public library. It had every journal that I ever needed. I mean, hundreds of journals that you couldn't find at the University of Cincinnati or even at Xavier or the University of Kentucky. Like a public library has this stuff. They sure do. Especially the one downtown. And so they have their own subtitles, African Americans in the Civil War book list, the Densmore House. They have a link to the Densmore, which is in Kentucky, obviously in Boone County, but they have a link to that. Historical District Underground Railroad Research Stations, which is right up my alley. I've been writing a lot of recent stuff on the Underground Railroad in northern Kentucky and also in Cincinnati. Claremont County Historic Society, African American Experience in Ohio in 1850. Conclusions. Conclusions is, again, to do African American history locally, number one, you have to get into a different mindset to ask different questions. Again, as I passed around that book on African American genealogy, if you just flip through the table of contents, it forces you to ask different questions that you would ask if you're doing other types of genealogical research. Number two, there are resources and people that you have to reach out to when you're doing African American history. You have to reach out to other people. You can't do African American history or any history in isolation, because at some point you're going to get stuck and you're going to have to reach out to somebody else. So just make it your official projection at the beginning, a list of people I need to reach out to if I'm doing that kind of history. You've got to reach out to them. There's no other way around, because you will hit roadblocks. And number three, African American history locally and or nationally is American history. It's not separate, it's the same history. It's just a different lens. Questions?
Does it get any easier when the thing leads you to the northern states versus the southern states as far as documenting black?
No, it depends on the topic, the individual, the event.
Somebody migrated down to here from Pennsylvania or?
No, it's haphazard. It just depends on, it just depends.
Like other old records?
Yeah, because in addition to Underground Railroad history, I've done history on Negro League baseball. And so that kind of stuff, you tend to have more pockets of information in bigger cities, but not necessarily depending on the team or the player. So it just depends. Yes, Anne?
I'm shamelessly plugging an exhibit back to the captive audience. At the end of March,
You have to give her a name and your affiliation.
I work, my name is Ann, and I'm in Special Collections and University Archives here at NKU, and at the end of March, we'll be putting up an exhibit on the legal lynching of John Mountjoy in Covington. In 1937, a student did this as a project for a class and turned it into an exhibit, so we're honored to host this exploration of injustice in the penal system in Kentucky. So I encourage anyone who has an interest in the topic to come on and take a look at it.
So let me do a plug for Campbell County real quick. Yes, Miss Shirley.
What, do you think I have a question?
No, I want you to talk about your facility. Campbell County Historic Society.
Equal time.
You got 2 minutes, go. Equal time.
Truthfully, there's some material there on African Americans. We are working to add to that. We have a great research facility. There is quite a bit of information. There's actually a lot of information on the Campbell County, Kentucky Roots website if you were doing some research on African Americans, because the people who run that site have made a great effort to add a lot of collections, to there. But yeah, anytime you want to do research or you need information, it is, in my opinion, the premier place in Campbell County, next to NKU Archives, to go.
Absolutely. I agree. Let me do one more plug. Shameless. Shameless plug with Jeff. Research.
Research.
Yeah, you did research in Covington. So
actually, research in northern Kentucky. What I researched was the history of black education. And since Covington had really the only black high school in the area, the blacks that wanted to go beyond just basic primary education kind of matriculated into Covington. Tons and tons of problems. First of all, the sources of information I had were newspapers and Covington School Board records, none of which are indexed, archived in any meaningful way. And the Covington School Board is very, very picky about who they will grant access to those records. I've tried to work with the Kenton County Library and the board to get those records microfilmed and put in the library so they're more easily accessible. I've tried to get them to donate those records to the NKU archives because, let's face it, a Board of Education is not an archives. And it needs to be placed in an environment where it will last. They don't do a bad job, but most of the old records, and they have board records down there that go back to the 1850s, and they're handwritten, and they're devilish difficult to read. Like Eric said, my whole research started with a question. I was at Holmes High School when they had the race riots in 1970, and I remember being a student there. I knew what I saw, but I did not understand it, and the only answers or the only explanations I was getting was coming from white principals and administrators and teachers. And I always knew that that was only half of the story, and I always wondered what the other half of it was. And the more I got into it, the deeper and deeper and deeper it got, and it took up like 4 years of my life.
I remember. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you mentioned the database of enslaved persons for Boone County. Are there similar databases for Kenton and Campbell?
No.
No.
Not for Campbell.
Not for Campbell. I
What
think
about
they are
Kenton?
Kenton. I've seen them, but I don't know how in-depth they are.
There were slave owners in my father's side of the family. They had about 6 or 7 slaves. I've seen a document that gives their sex and ages. I'd like to find out more about them. How could you begin?
Oh, we're gonna have to talk on
Okay.
Some of it might be in the
It's
state
not a
archives,
simple,
too.
what's that?
Some of it might be in the state archives.
Yeah, but I don't think I can do a simple response.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna have to be a detailed
But
discussion.
you
I-
could possibly
Sure.
find out more.
Oh, sure. I've got cards. I'll hand them out later. Yes?
I've tried to look into some of the Freedmen Bureau reports.
Yes.
I read excerpts from them,
Mhm.
and I noticed that Cincinnati Public has a huge collection of microfilm.
Yes.
Is there any way to index that stuff or search that stuff without slogging all the way through it?
Nope.
You can volunteer.
You can volunteer to.
It's
No way.
it's
You got
online,
it.
but there are none for Kentucky. There are no Freedmen Bureau's records for Kentucky. It wasn't part
Sure
of
there are, I
it.
read them.
They should
But
be.
they're not online now.
They're not online. I know they are. And I think they're down. Some are at the Kentucky Historic Society.
Online has
But I don't think they're
Alabama,
online.
Arkansas, Florida, Georgia.
No, they're not online.
But not Kentucky, at least not yet.
Because I know somebody who wrote the dissertation on the Freedmen's Bureau in Kentucky, and they went down to Kentucky Historic Society to literally read them off a microphone.
So they're in Frankfurt.
Oh,
They're
My family
really-
search was investigating the
So they
Freedmen
do
Bureau
have a
records.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought that they were in the process of doing that, but I'm not sure if
That's
they
what
had
I,
Kentucky.
no,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
but I don't think they've done Kentucky
Right.
either.
Okay. I know
So
they were
it was
doing,
done
they
this
had
year.
states listed, but I'm not sure about Kentucky.
Kentucky ones, because they're not online.
Yes.
Interesting.
I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there's a statue of a black gentleman on the river in Covington, sitting on the bench.
James Bradley.
Have you done any research on him in his area with the lane?
I did a little bit. The only information I have is the little paragraph or two that's in my book that talks about him being kidnapped from Africa, him educating himself and his connection to Lane, but there's never been a detailed book.
Okay.
There's no
'Cause he was very, I
articles.
understand he was very important in the lane debates.
He was,
He was the only black person
for a
allowed to
while.
speak in there.
Mhm.
And I guess later on he went to Oberlin
Mhm.
or whatever, so
Yep.
he was a very prominent person in the history, right? So-
Yeah, it's just the issue of trying to document what people think they know and hear. To get the documentation is a whole different thing. But that's on my list. I'll get to it sooner than later. Yes?
Was there much of a free black community in North?
Usually in the bigger cities, Covington, Newport, as farther out you go, Boone County, there's small pockets.
Few villages.
communities. They tend to dissipate right after Civil War. I mean, I've done a little periphery research in Boone County, and if you follow the census tracts up into about 1865, 66, there's about 1,000, 1,500 African Americans in Boone County. They have their own schools, they have churches, and once you hit the Reconstruction period and soon after, they just vanish off the slates. And some of the reasons they vanish off the slates is that they are forced to leave the area for a lot of different reasons that'll take us another 2 hours to listen. So yeah, there's pockets of it. Yes.
Yeah, I just think we ought to mention something about the African American Heritage Task Force.
Oh.
They accumulated a lot of materials that were donated to the NKU archives. I don't think they've been properly organized yet.
They're in the process.
I know they're in the process, but I don't think they're really available right now. But when they do become available, that will be a very valuable source of information.
Hey, one.
Yes.
During and after Reconstruction, do these African Americans start showing up in city directories and stuff
Yes.
like that?
Yes. And especially the ones in Boone County, they'll end up across the river in Indiana, in Madison and Rising Sun, and even in Cincinnati downtown, up in North College Hill. I mean, you can trace them through city directories. The same names start to show up in other places.
I have a plug for the city directories.
Oh,
Cincinnati Public Library now has Newport, Covington, and Cincinnati city directories online and searchable on their website.
Wow.
It's kind of hidden, and sometimes I haven't just bookmarked the actual place, but if you call them or go there, they will show you how to find it.
Wow.
They are searchable by street address or by name.
Wow.
And Covington and Newport from 1880 to 1920, and all the Cincinnati ones are online and search. I know, it's amazing.
I know.
They used to have to go down and sit
I
and page
have.
through the books,
Yep.
but, so now, you know, with the
Wow.
spelling variation, you can find the name, and, you know, if you have a name, or if you have an address.
Right.
And then that helps you go to the census records then.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
It gives you an address.
When did those get online? Here recently?
Yeah, within the last year or so.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. Great place.
Yes, ma'am?
I'd just like to say that from personal research, there was a group of free blacks in Newport in 1850 who actually stayed in Newport well after the Civil War, and they were very involved politically with the school system, with the government. They didn't just sit down and watch things happen. They got up and made things happen. They were delegates to conventions. They pushed the agenda to make things better for their own children, just like we do today. So sometimes we think that they didn't do anything, but when you start doing the research, they really were involved.
Any final questions?
Just a comment, there were also groups like that in Covington, and they were largely responsible for creating black education in Covington.
So if you have any questions, feel free to call me or email me. You got my card. I saw the people who kind of sort of know me in different genres, church or school, or you don't get a call. Yes.
Are you familiar with the Charity Southgate case?
Nope.
The lady who sued for like 20 years to get her freedom?
Nope. Never heard of it.
Tell you about that.
We can talk.